Hello and welcome to Ananke's Women in Literature Festival. I am absolutely thrilled to welcome two amazing authors and translator, Isabel Fargo Cole and Sulagna Mukhopadhyay. Thank you so much for joining this year's the third edition of Ananke's Women in Literature Festival. And I will begin with introducing these two amazing speakers. Isabel Fargo Cole grew up in New York City, received a BA from the University of Chicago in 1995, and has lived in Berlin ever since as a writer and translator of authors such as Wolfgang Hilbig, Franz Feumann, and Adalbert Stifter. Apologies for mispronouncing any name. So back to the introduction. Her translation of Hilbig's Old Rendering Plant received the Kurt and Helen Wolf Prize in 2018. Since 2005, she has published short fiction and essays in German. Her debut novel, which, Isabel, if you could pronounce it, if you can say it, that would be wonderful.
Die grüne Grenze.
Thank you so much.
In English, it's the green frontier, the green border.
Thank you so much. The book was nominated for the prize of the Leipzig Book Fair. Her second novel, Das Gift der Bienen, and Isabel, if you could pronounce that as well.
Das Gift der Biene, it's the poison of the honeybee.
Thank you so much. This was published by Edition Nautilus in 2019 and selected for the 2019 Litera Tour Nord. In 2022, again, Isabel, if you could pronounce this name, I would be eternally grateful.
Oh, that was correct. No problem.
All right, great. This appeared in the Naturkunden Nature Writing series at Matthes und Sietz. From 2006 to 2016, she co-edited No Man's Land on online magazine for New German Literature in English. In 2013, she was a co-organizer of the initiative Writers Against Mass Surveillance. Currently, she organizes the initiative www.waldschäffen.de, and that is spelled as WALDSCHAFFEN.de, which involves Berlin artists and writers in forestry projects. So welcome on board, Isabel Fargo Cole.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Next, we have Sulagna Mukhopadhyay, who completed her master's in comparative literature from JU and English literature from Jodhpur National University. She has completed German language course till C1 from Goethe Institute, Max Muller Bhavan, Kolkata. Sulagna teaches in the primary department of an English medium private school, South Point School, and is a German language trainer at JU. She is also a translator and translates works from German to Bengali. 3 of her translated books have gotten published from JU: Catherine Schmidt poems, Nodi O Debdu, a novel, Isabel Fargo Cole's novel, Sobuj Semana, and a collection of short stories from Ritobek, Marcus Kirchhofer's book, Kanta. Apologies for mispronouncing these names. Currently, she's working on Krista Wolf's novel, Der Getlit Himmel, Melinda Nudge Abonji's novel, Tobin Flagen, of Hannah Arendt's Die Freiheit. Sulagna, you're going to...
Die Freiheit, Freit zu sein.
Great. The Art of War by
Sun Tzu.
All right. She has learned Bharatnatyam, the Indian classical dance form from South India, and was also a dance critic for The Telegraph for 10 consecutive years. She has participated as an actor in a Bengali theater group, Sang Barta, from 1985 and 1993. This is an absolute pleasure to welcome you, Sulagna. Thank you so much, Isabel, Fargo, and Sulagna, for
Thank you.
coming on board. And I would like to begin by each of you, talking about this beautiful collaboration that has taken place. Isabel, from you, I'd like to know, the writing process, about the book, and Sulagna, the process that takes a translator, translating one, ideas and envisioning those ideas, the writer's thoughts from one language to another. Isabel, you're also a writer and a translator. So how was the process? Let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I should just say a little bit about the book first to make things more easy to grasp. It's also kind of tied with my own journey because I came to Berlin in 1995. And as many of you know, Germany was a divided country from 1961 to 1989. It was divided by the Iron Curtain. There was capitalist West Germany and communist East Germany. And I grew up with the Cold War and with this division from, watching it from the US. And when the Berlin Wall fell and the border opened, I really wanted to go and see what life was like in East Germany, which had been this, closed off, kind of a mystery or closed off area to us. So I came to Berlin in 1995 and studied at the university in what had been the east part of Berlin. And my friends, the people that I met, were all from the former East Germany and from the socialist background. And I just kind of took in their stories and, had a lot of discussions and, political arguments because we have very different political backgrounds. And I was really fascinated by this kind of idea of this world, this kind of attempt at a socialist utopia that had collapsed, and how people were dealing with that, and how this past affects their lives and affects the next generation. So this book that I wrote over a very long period of time and with a lot of research is actually set in East Germany, in socialist East Germany in the 70s and 80s, and it's set in a little town that's very near the border, which was a very, fortified border with guards, and, that no one could, that was very hard to cross without getting killed. And so it's about the atmosphere of this border and about divisions and about living in a very restricted society and, maybe wanting to escape or find kind of some freedom of scope for imagination and for developing yourself.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And how did this collaboration come into effect?
I think it began when, I'm trying to remember, I think that Sulagna was in Berlin. I know that I have been in Kolkata a couple of times because I actually translate books from German to English for a publisher, Seagull Books in Kolkata, which is how the connection to this festival took place through Naveen Kishore, the publisher. So I can't remember now if I met Sulagna in Kolkata then, or if we met when she came to Berlin on a translator's program. But we met and she was interested in the book, and and it's the first translation of the book into any language, and I'm very pleased that it has been translated into Bengali because I do have this connection to Kolkata.
Well, I distinctly remember this. She came with some other writers and officials of literary. She's colloquium Berlin, Elizabeth, and there was a program at Jadavpur University where I teach German, JU, and also at Max Muller Bhavan. Now at Max Muller, a part of her book, Die Grüne Grenze, was translated by the translator, Shubroto Saha. So since Mr. Saha read, while rather he was reading this book, this part which he translated. There was a session at the Maximilian Library in Kolkata. And while he was reading this book, I was finding it pretty interesting because I like, First World War, it's there. I mean, I'm talking about the Second World War, the Nazi period. It interests me. I mean, how they tortured the Jews and all. So then I have visited Berlin a couple of times and been to those places where I've seen those dilapidated houses with shattered glasses. And when you come to the almost end of this novel, you will see she's describing such houses. In one of those houses, the central character Thomas goes with Edita and with their daughter Lena. Do you remember? You know, of course, Isabel. She goes to meet the mother.
No spoilers, no spoilers.
No, so they're that thing interested me to read a few pages, basically to read a few pages because it's a pretty thick book. So I just couldn't go through the whole book, but I read through a few pages and then I realized I'm interested in translating. So that same year, that was in 2019, when I visited Berlin at the invitation of Isabel to attend a lyric workshop. And Isabel came to see a show, and then I expressed my wishes to her. And that's how the whole thing started.
As an author, Isabel, when it comes to the act of translating, how, and it's very, this collaboration and the being in sync with, the author and the writing being in sync with the translator, that is really important. So what is the process like? Because, it's like something, you're giving it to somebody to cherish, to hold, to envision. So how is it like? And then, the same question to you is, Sulagna, as a translator, being handed, this work, this idea and this beautiful thing that now you have to cherish. How then is that process for you? So Isabel, you first.
Yeah, this was my first time experiencing translation from the other end, so it was kind of new to me, and I've almost always translated authors who've already passed on, so I can't enter in a dialogue with them, and I have really total freedom in a way to do to work with their text. So it was an really interesting experience for me. I knew that I had to be available, to answer questions. And I knew that the novel, because it has a very, a lot of historic specificity, that there would be many things that I would have to explain. And so that we would be in a dialogue about that. And at the same time, I felt that I did have to give Sulagna a lot of freedom, because it's a very, I think to translate such a specific historical context, you need to take freedom or maybe explain some things. And I think that, at some point as a writer, you do have to let go of your work and say, okay, it's like a child that grows up and goes out into the world. And for me, because I don't, especially going into Bengali, which I can't even read the alphabet, so I can't even try to assess the translation. And so I just felt, okay, I have to let go of it. And I'm really curious. I'm very frustrated that I can't read the translation at all. But I've heard Sulagna read it, and it's really wonderful to hear the sound of my writing in a completely different language.
See, in my case, the thing was, when I started translating, it was just like without a thought, diving into the Pacific Ocean, frankly speaking. Before that, I've already translated Flussbild mit, a couple of poems from Katrin Schmidt's book, Flussbild mit Engel. And which has come out from Jadavpur University Press as Nodiyo Devdut. But since I was during 1990, when they were celebrating on 3rd October, I was in Berlin. So I had by that time spoken, that was my first visit. My husband and I, we went at the invitation of Lions Club there. So at that, when we were there, and I already spoke to many of my friends, I had an idea. So translating the poems was easier. But then when I started translating this book, there are parallel texts. Like there you find the central character, and then he is going back to an age which is not even 18th century, much before that.
Oh yeah, I should explain the central character in the novel is also writing a novel that's so he's also, I'm writing a historical novel about East Germany, and the central character in my novel is writing a novel about the Middle Ages. So there are these different layers.
It's parallel text, that's why I said. Now the first part where Isabel is writing, that part I had not much of a problem. Where I had the problem is the central character, Thomas Grüneberg is writing the Middle Age historical. He's dealing with the Middle Age historical issues. So there, either I had to Google, read, or I had to, get in touch with her, disturb her. Sorry, but I have my friends who have also helped me a lot, because sometimes she was busy with her translations and I was also desperate that I have to do it now. And then there were friends who helped me out with this history of the Middle Age. And that's how it continued. But this, when I did Katrin Schmidt's book, I didn't feel this, but when I finished this novel and saw it in print, it was just like a new baby born to me. So I was, caressing it. So that is it. That's it. But if you allow me to say, I will say I had a lot of cultural contexts which I had to deal with.
I think the process is it's so beautiful. The author has a relationship with the reader, and this is another beautiful relationship with the translator. And everything coming into aligning. All the stars being aligned. How we're talking about flexibility and giving space to the translator as well. Both of you are translators, so how important it is for the translated work to have the same way, to have an alignment, to have an alignment, but have the freedom to explore as well.
May I start?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, okay. As I said, the cultural part, I had to continuously give it a thought because certain things we don't have in our culture, which I've already mentioned in another interview where both Isabel and I were. And there I said that the concept of Küchentisch. I mean, this is a table which you find in the West everywhere, I think. At least I found in
a kitchen table.
Yeah, the kitchen table. Now, in Indian system, we don't have a kitchen table. And you sit there, you are discussing serious issues. So this I could not write as khabar table, that is the dining table, but I had to say that ranna ghore table boshi. So sitting at the table inside the kitchen. This is one thing. There are other issues also, like there was Latin, quite a number of Latin words, which some I could translate, some I couldn't. Then, of course, I had to speak to Isabel, and there was one whole page, and she said, you don't have to. There were Russian words. Now, I had Russian in my MA, but I've almost forgotten. It's but there sometimes she helped me, sometimes because I can still read the alphabets, the Slav alphabets. I Googled and found out. Then I have a few friends who are basically from the eastern part of Germany, because in eastern part of Germany, everyone had to learn Russian. So it is quite obvious that in the novel, since it's dealing with the eastern part of Germany, it is quite obvious you find those words in Russian. So I had to deal with those things, but not that much of cultural context was a problem otherwise, because I knew, when you are translating, you need to be to that place, to mix with the people, to know their culture, to know the etiquettes. And then it is my personal opinion, absolutely. I don't know whether Isabel might say something else, but it is my opinion that you need to know the people to the core. Then translation becomes easier. There is a flow. Okay, but still, I have got different views. Like a friend of mine, she is in her 60s, late 60s. She said she could not relate to this novel. So at times she found some of the parts very plastic. Her knowledge is till the Holocaust period. Now I have another two friends who have read them, and they said that one knows a little bit of German, so she really liked it. And she said, even though I do not know this period so well, but through your translation, I could easily understand what was happening there. The other one, who is a scientist, she said that she Googled and just read a few lines about this period to come to terms with the understanding of the novel.
Isabel, do you have?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to think about cultural specificity. And for me, there were some interesting thoughts that I had about it being translated into Bengali that I wanted to mention. That I think that for me, it's interesting that actually Bengal has, I think in some ways, Bengal and Kolkata, there is a strong left-wing tradition, a left-wing political tradition. And this idea of socialism is still quite relevant for many people. And there were also a lot of contacts to Russia, to the Soviet Union in the Soviet era. And that was for me kind of quite interesting, because I had the sense that maybe there's in some ways, perhaps people, Bengalis, might be able to connect to some aspects of this context in a way that perhaps Americans couldn't, or might be more, it might seem more relevant to them. I know that I think that Seagull Books in Kolkata was very open to East German writers, and I think that that might also have something to do with it, that the political context is for Bengalis is still fresh and interesting. And another thing that and we've kind of, Shulagna and I have talked about that a bit, about the that political connection that some people might have to it. And what was also interesting for me is that Bengal is also a divided region. It's a border that's also very around which there are also tensions, and is quite close to Kolkata. And a lot of Bengali writers like Amitav Ghosh have written about this border situation between Bengal and India and Bangladesh. And so for me, things like that are kind of I think even if you have a lot of cultural specificity in a book, there can also be a level on which there are commonalities between two countries that you wouldn't expect, that Germany and Bengal would have these kind of commonalities. But I think it's always possible to find them, and as a translator to kind of build on them or draw upon them.
I would like to pitch in with one thing. My own aunt, I mean, she's a hardcore communist. She said, is the writer from US. So I don't think so. What she's talking about the communists, she isn't correct. That's a bird's eye view she's projecting. So see, that was and still is the view about the Russians.
Yeah, she thought it was negative about East Germany.
Yeah, many. You see the Russian, what they're doing now in Ukraine. So, but many the communists here, they are not saying anything against it. I was also a member of the Students' Federation of India, which was a wing of the Communist Party, India Marxists. But I am there to criticize what Russians are doing. I'm sorry.
Yes, that's also an issue among East Germans, that many East Germans, because of this past, there are many different opinions, but there is this kind of, and it's interesting for me thinking about history, that this historical friendship with the Soviet Union, it still affects people's political attitudes today.
That's true.
And Isabel, it's interesting, you spoke about the political, how aligned Kolkata or Bengal is politically, but I'm talking about geographies as well, being close to, a communist country, and not just Russia, China as well. So there are a lot of alignments taking place, that basically would resonate with readers, especially in the South Asian region.
Yeah, I would hope that there would be a resonance. And so I was very, it's been very interesting to hear about the reactions that Bengali readers have had to it, especially if they're political reactions, because it's interesting. I live, among people from the former East Germany for whom these issues of socialism are still very much alive. Well, in the US, it's very far away for people, and it's not really part of the discourse. And so it's interesting to have this book go into a language where people still react very emotionally to these political issues.
And especially, there's the geopolitical aspect of it, and then there's the people would, book would resonate, especially because of, the suffering and the grief that comes with war. This region, South Asia, has been suffering from it. It still is. So that is another aspect that brings the reader closer to the author and to the idea behind the book as well.
I would like to tell you something. The partition of Bengal, because my parental family, even my maternal family, my mother was born here, but they came after the partition. And after they came from a place called Borishal, which is called the Venice of Bangladesh. So it's mostly water bodies. And like because of that past, I've heard a lot of stories from my grandmother, from my paternal aunts, but I've never heard one single word from my father, from my grandfather. Surprisingly, they never wanted to speak about it. Yes, there is a reason for that, but that way, those who have come from that part, whose families, whose ancestors have come from from East Bengal, now Bangladesh, they could easily relate to what has happened when Thomas, at the very beginning, when Thomas and Edita come to this place to stay, and he just cannot adjust himself to that place. This is what has happened to all families, to almost all families who came from East Bengal. My father already had two of his uncles here, paternal uncles. So they did not go and stay in camps. The camp life was like a hell. And besides, the people who belong to the West Bengal, that was East Bengal, West Bengal, like my in-laws' family, they did not accept them so easily. Even when I got married, that people from the East Bengal were known as Bangals, Bangal. And it was, in a way, a derogatory word, a very derogatory word. And the people from the West Bengal referred to us as Bangals and looked down upon us and ridiculed us when they heard that we have left everything, land, our gold, everything. My grandmother had to leave behind. They used to ridicule us. They used to think that it's all shit stories, nothing else. So, I think because of this, my father never wanted to speak about that era. Even my grandfather, who was a successful lawyer there in Borishal, when he came over, obviously he was never that successful here. So you can understand the agony. So when, reading through the first few pages, and this is occurring in the novel very often, that Thomas is feeling himself out of place. So there, people could relate themselves easily.
Isabel?
Yeah, that's very interesting. And also one thing that struck me was, Shulagna, when you talk about people not wanting to speak about the traumatic experiences that they've had, I think that's another thing that I write about in the novel, is people suppressing traumatic experiences, not wanting to talk about them, and also trying to find a way to tell those stories. And actually, interestingly, I had some readings with the books in people from that, with this book in people from that area who lived with the border. And I was very, I was very nervous about it because, of course, I'm an American. I'm writing, it's really cultural appropriation for me to write about this experience. But in fact, it's something that hasn't been written about a lot, this experience of living in this right next to the border, in this very restricted zone. And I did have people actually come to me and say, this needs to be written about more. And it's really hard for us to talk about it because we've been traumatized by it. And maybe it's easier for someone who has distance, who comes from outside. Maybe it's easier for them to write about it. So that was really important for me to hear, because I do ask myself what it is very difficult to write about a very remote experience to oneself. But I think sometimes it is the case that the people who experience these things themselves, they aren't able to talk about it.
And you talk about cultural appropriation, and you give this fine example of people who are traumatized, but they keep it pent up inside. But in this day and age, my question to you, Isabel, is, are we focusing too much on cultural appropriation? And yes, it is wrong, I'm not saying that, but an author like yourself, who's writing about this trauma and the suffering and the grief and everything that has people have been through, isn't it important to put it there? And you've had people coming up to you and saying that. So where's the the balancing act in an environment where we're really focused on cultural appropriation? And it's and for me, it's really important to bring it out, to show empathy. So yeah, what are your thoughts, Isabel?
Yes, of course, it's a very fraught issue, but I think that the discussion, there is a lot of justification, of course, to a lot of the criticisms of cultural appropriation, that call attention to some things that are very important. On the other hand, I do think it's true that, as many people have pointed out, there is no culture without appropriation. So culture always means taking and exchanging and stealing ideas and doing other things with them, and being curious about things you don't know about. So I think I would like to see if, I hope that in literature and in the cultural community, we can kind of try to free ourselves a little bit from any chilling effect that this discussion might have, because I just think it would be very sad if people feel that they can't, that it's dangerous to take the perspective of, a man feeling that he can't take the perspective of a woman, or an American not daring to take this perspective of a German, or whatever. I think it's very important for writers to feel the freedom to try to put themselves into other people's heads and experiences. I just think it's important. Of course, you have to do it with curiosity, real curiosity, and with respect, and with a willingness to learn, and and also to make mistakes. And
Absolutely.
I hope that we can kind of get to a place where people feel able to experiment with different perspectives. And I think we are seeing that more.
Absolutely, because isn't that just that's what I think, that it's a kind of censorship as well, because we are so focused on not appropriating culture, that we're self-censoring, and we're censoring others as well.
Yeah, I think, I mean, sometimes I think censorship is, maybe too strong a word, but I think people feel maybe there's a kind of taboo about exploring different perspectives, or this kind of idea that there's some sort of a women's perspective or an American perspective or a Bengali perspective, and that someone can tell me, this is how we Bengalis see things, or this is how we East Germans see things. I was very, concerned to kind of to convey an East German perspective, but the thing that I can most say about my East German friends is they all violently disagree with each other about all kinds of things. So, I think assuming to explore another perspective also means understanding that there is no kind of monolithic perspective that these people have. It's each perspective is polyphonic in itself.
And isn't that what even translation is all about?
Yes, that's absolutely true. And that's a very good point, is that, if you take this idea of cultural appropriation being a negative thing, if you take that too far, then translation is completely impossible, or, it would be a reprehensible thing. So that's another reason not to take it too far.
Exactly.
Then it becomes a plastic thing. Then people, the reader who are getting the translated version will never enjoy the text, because they cannot feel at ease with the text. And once any text, if you're reading, if you are not feeling comfortable, then you don't read. So no matter whether it's German culture, African culture, Indian culture, I mean, Pakistan and Indian culture, they are almost the same.
True.
But you cannot, that way, it doesn't help. That's what I feel. I have one question to Isabel, which I didn't get a chance to ask anytime. Being a woman, I mean, you are a woman, you are a woman author, that way I'm putting it now, because in German language, it's still, that distinction is there in the language. So Autorin and Autor is a man. But how could you take a male character as the central character and not editor? Because at times it is not that you are not compassionate towards editor, but I found, that's my realization, that towards Thomas, you were more compassionate. Am I true? And why did you take a male character as your central character?
It's very interesting that you asked that question, because I always wondered when the book came out in German if someone in Germany would ask me that question, and no one ever did. So it's interesting to think about. It was a bit of a coincidence, because I had a constellation of characters, and I had this family, and I knew that the woman was going to be a sculptor, and I knew that the man was going to be a writer, for various reasons that are, hard to get into. But anyway, in my head, she was a sculptor and he was a writer. And so he became the obvious person to narrate the story, because he himself had a certain distance to things, and he himself was thinking about how to tell stories. And so it kind of, by chance, he became the main character, or made himself the main character. And that was also an interesting experiment for me to try to inhabit this male character. And so that was also kind of part of it. I was inhabiting this strange world that I hadn't lived in, and I was inhabiting this male character and kind of trying to turn my own perspective on its head. And I think, I'm trying to remember, I think that the writer Rebecca West, I think it was she, once said that actually women should always write about men, and men should always write about women, because they have that outside view and they can actually analyze the other, the other sex better. So that would be another excuse. But it was a bit of a coincidence that it turned out that way, but it ended up as an interesting experiment for me.
Thank you.
My last question to both of you as authors and as translators. Isabel, you said something about, the character making himself the lead protagonist. And that is not the case when you're translating, a book or a work of art. So, how different or challenging or difficult it is for as a translator, because the story, the plot is there, everything is there, and your interpretation, how you're envisioning it. So is there any challenge involved in that process? And it's a question for both of you.
Well, there are different challenges, of course, to writing and to translation. The challenge with writing is you have, in a sense, too much freedom. You sit there in front of the blank page, and you can put anything on it, but often it's very hard to fill this emptiness. But sometimes, it just kind of has a life of its own, and characters, become things that you didn't expect them to be, and so forth. So there's that kind of interplay of this kind of this sort of self-propelling dynamic, and then this kind of blank space that has to be filled up. Whereas translation, you have the challenge is these restrictions you have, but on the other hand, you always have the structure there. So often I find if I'm kind of blocked in writing, it helps me to go back to translating for a bit, because at least there's always something there that you can work on, and something concrete that you can get a grasp on. So it's kind of opposing kinds of challenges in a sense.
I feel challenges are there. While you are writing a story, like I've done this short story, which has Mama Ishbinda. So there, the challenge was I was dealing with dementia. So, I had to be very cautious that I am not distorting anything. So that was there. And while translation, the challenge was how closer I am coming to the text, to the original text. And I had to be like, trust me, if you give me a second chance, the same novel I'll write in a different way, translate in a different way. I mean, certain things which I've translated, I feel, I could have done it a different way. I mean, that satisfaction is never there. And I think if you're never satisfied that way, then your translation becomes a success.
Absolutely. I think that's something so beautifully said. Is there anything you'd like to say, Isabel, Sulagna, before we end the session?
No, I think that was a very good note to end it on. And I could only just add that, of course, every novel, if you wrote the same novel again, you would want to write it differently. And I think I also have the sense that this dissatisfaction, if you can keep it alive, that's what makes a work of art have that life to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. But this doesn't happen with the Markus Kirchhoffer's text, Kata, Der Stachel, because those are small, short stories. Short stories are easier to translate. Now I'm translating Der Geteilte Himmel by Christa Wolf, where sometimes, I'm stopping at a point, and the next day when again I'm starting and I'm going through a few lines which till where I have stopped, I start correcting them, changing. So I think this is a continuous process, and I love to do this. I have quite a number of translation offers, one by Christopher Kloeble, The other one is yesterday only. She will be knowing Isabel, Ulrike Dresner, her new novel. So it again deals with shift of place. The Sabine, the word Heimat, home, continuously pricks me.
Yeah.
Why I tell you? Because I've heard stories from my maternal uncles, from my paternal side. So the concept of home was not there for quite a long time. Now, when the center here started, they were thinking of doing this NRCCAA. That means they're going to see people who have come after 71, something like that. One evening, I was so traumatized. I'm using this word traumatized because this is, again, a sort of fascist government. The center here. And, they are trying to cleanse the society like the Nazis. And then, when I came to know this, I was so traumatized. I was thinking, where is my father's birth certificate? I can't have it now. I can't show it. But my husband will never have to leave. My son will never have to leave. But I have to leave the family. So this trauma is always there. And, so while I was translating this during the COVID period and this NRCCA was continuing, maybe my translation had an effect because I could see what was happening to Thomas, what he is writing. People are coming inside home without his knowledge. They're shuffling through his desk. Okay, they're shuffling through the pages. They are even coming, threatening him indirectly. Okay. So these are the things we are experiencing now.
Absolutely,
So
absolutely.
maybe that has helped me.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you so much, Isabel and Sulagna, for this wonderful,
Welcome.
fascinating conversation. And we look forward to, Isabel, your fireside chat with Radhika as well. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a nice time. Bye-bye.